from sunny South Africa, but freezing cold South Africa, as Conrad says. I'm here co-hosting with my colleagues Amelia Visagie and Madi van Skalkwyk. Wonderful names for Michelle to pronounce. And we have Michelle and Heather helping us with the technical stuff and the background stuff. So we're just delighted. We've had a couple of very interesting sessions already, and I think some of us are living on very little sleep, having got up at all hours to follow sessions. So it's just wonderful that we have this ability to be able to connect like this across the globe and to share so many ideas and so many stories. My name is Janine, and I am a community development worker with about 30 years of experience. I'm absolutely passionate about storytelling because from an ABCD perspective, that's where we really start connecting with people, is when we sit down and we just listen to each other's stories. So I'm delighted to be sharing this space with Madi and with Amelia. Maybe they can just, in a couple of sentences, give us a tiny background about who they are and what they do, and then we will start with a little screen share. Over to you, Madi.
Hi everyone, I'm Madi from Glocal, as Janine said, and yeah, so I'm from Human Library South Africa. It's part of the international movement, and for the past 3 years, I will call myself a professional story listener. Extremely passionate just about giving a platform for people to share their stories and see the potential impact we can make through storytelling.
Cool, thank you.
Amelia?
My name is Amelia. I've been involved in asset-based community development, and part of our idea is to get people to tell their stories, because if we look at where they come from and where they've grown into, it's amazing to hear that stories, and it's so motivational. So I think that's the reason why I'm here today, is to also share some amazing stories that we had in South Africa, and about the work that we've done, but also here, what is happening all over the world.
Wonderful. So we would love to be able to have the opportunity to ask each one of you to introduce yourselves, but I think it's going to take us too long in the session. But Amelia will explain that when you do share something, if you could just tell us your name and where you come from, that will help us in getting to know each other a little bit. So I'm going to just share my screen so that we can get through some house rules and start with a little bit of a good old South African welcome. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, over to you, Amelia.
All right, thank you, Janine. Although it's a Zoom session, we can still introduce ourselves. So I would like you to, whenever you get a chance to speak, please introduce yourself, say I'm Amelia, and then you continue with what you want to say. Guys, we only got 2 hours. I know it sounds like a long time, but when we start telling stories, it's going to be amazing, and the time is going to fly. So please don't get stuck in expanding too much on your story. And remember, this is a safe space for all of us to share our stories and to connect with one another. We are people from all over the globe, so be kind to one another today, and during this session, no judgment. Everybody has a story to tell, and their story and their point of view is important for all of us. So let's create that safe space for everybody to share. The next one is raise your hand. There at the bottom of the screen, there's a little hand. When you want to say something, raise your hand, and between Janine and I, we will give you some feedback, some time to say your say. Then you'll see there's a green and a red mute button and an unmute button. So I think that's at this stage, there's a lot of Zoom sessions, and it happens that people start talking, but they don't unmute their buttons. So when you talk, mute, unmute, and when you don't talk, let's unmute the session so that we don't hear all the background noises. And then very important, this session is going to be recorded, so everybody will get the session afterwards and some feedback about that. the next one. Put on your video. It's nice to see the people whom we are talking to. So we would like to see who you are. And then at the end of the session, we will take a photo so that we can share what we've done and who were available on the session. Please put your cell phone on silent. And if you need to talk, put your mute button on. You can take your call, but try to be in the session because I think it's important to hear your voice. Okay. And then you'll see there on the chat side as well, where most of you did say something. Make sure that if you don't want to share on and talk to us, but you would like to share something, you're welcome to put it in the chat button on the right-hand side. And then we are going to be busy for about 2 hours. I know it's going to be a long session. If you would like to go and make some coffee or something or do a leg stretch, you're welcome to do so. I'll suggest just put off your video camera so that everybody don't see what you are busy doing there. And then the bathrooms on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, and some bathrooms are outside, so you can go easily to one of your bathrooms. And then after the session, we will have about at 3 o'clock, I think we'll have some snacks. So I hope to join you during the snack time. So this is the house rules. Anything else that you would like to share, guys and girls? Fine.
So we would like to give you a really true and wonderful South African welcome, which I now can't do because my screen is freezing. Why is that? Sorry. There we go. So sit back and relax and enjoy the music of one of our fantastic exports, Johnny Clegg and Savuka.
Janine, I don't hear anything. Does anybody else hear something? No.
Sorry, let me...
Let's try again. Thank you.
Share screen. Share computer sound is there.
There you are. Something is happening.
Can you hear the sound?
Zion Beacon. Asimonanga, asimonanga mfowethu, laphe khona, lawa fela khona. Victoria Mtenge. Asimonanga, asimonanga utati wethu, laphe khona, lawa fela khona. Dr. Neil Agate and all the others. Asimonanga, asimonanga mfowethu, laphe khona, lawa fela khona. Angithi wena, angithi wena, wena lawo sofika nini nasiyobona, nasiyobona. Asimonanga, asimonanga umantela, laphe khona. Asimonanga, asimonanga umantela, laphe khona, asimonanga, asimonanga umantela, laphe
So that, I hope, has given you a rousing South African welcome, and Madi will refer more later on to the significance of that video, why we actually chose that one for this session. Just to give a bit of background for anyone who's not entirely familiar with the ABCD that we've mentioned, the asset-based citizen-led development approach. We have got some of these little video snips that just help you to understand a background about what the approach is. It's basically the idea of enabling people to be able to focus on the assets that they have, the strengths that they have, which will enable them to be able to do things for themselves in their communities rather than waiting for external assistance or focusing only on the negatives, on the problems. So this is a video clip from the work that Amelia is doing, and it's one of her community workers with her mother.
My name is Andile Mapumula. I'm part of the communication and stakeholder engagement team in Lenwood Tswane office. We are in KZN and this is my mother. So I did not go to anyone in the village. I'm just with my mother. That's why I can touch, hug, and kiss her. She is part of the CWP program. So what they do in the community, they make a lot of community initiatives or community programs. In the spirit of ABCD, as you can see on her background, this is a avocado tree. And then we also have got some lemon tree. We also have some banana trees. So, because I've told her about ABCD and she thinks it's a very brilliant idea, she's been doing it all her life. She's a farmer, she's a entrepreneur, and she can make her own clothes. Look at this carefully. This used to be the top for an overall. What did she do? She converted it into an apron. Because as a Zulu traditional woman, she is not allowed to put trousers. So it is about culture also. So in the spirit of ABCD, she made her own apron and she can wear it whenever. So I call upon all of you, for the fact that we are at home, we are working from home, because of the corona outbreak, it doesn't mean that we need to sit and do nothing. You can all do your own little ABCD initiatives to make sure that after the corona outbreak, she has told me that she is.
Janine, just to give a little bit of context in that, when Corona invaded our space and everything was frozen and we had to work from home, we sat with a lot of community champions in the Rustenburg area, and we thought, how are we going to motivate these people? How are they going to be able to do something and still work in their communities? And then Andile and Far, you'll see the next video, came up with some of their own videos to say, hey, but we've got assets, we can do something, we are powerful. None of us has nothing, everybody has something. And through these videos, the community champions went further and they developed their own skills and knowledge and changed their own attitude in their own communities. So I think we can show the next video that Far did, and perhaps the two of them can also give some feedback about what they've done.
Oops, sorry.
How's it, everyone? Hope you're all keeping fit during the lockdown period. I've built my own gym at my own carport with my own assets. The pulley there is from a bit of my upselling kits, and then an old empty container of paint filled with sand, and then of course the rope, and then a carabiner for hold adjustable. I can sometimes use both hands like this. Okay, so the old mop, it was broken and thrown away, as you can see. It's old mop, so I needed a stick. So I chopped it. So now I'm going to attach it using my knowledge from my climbing cyclovich knot to a nice good size. Make sure it's in the middle, and then break it up, and then off we go.
So there's just a couple of videos to give you an overview of what ABCD is all about. It's basically starting where you are, using what you have, and doing what you can, so that community members and anybody can just look around at what is available and get going on community projects without having to wait until someone else is coming in to help them. You can start where you are, you can use what you have, and you can do what you can. So now we will start. I'd like you to get into a reflective mood. I'm going to read a quotation to you to get us to start thinking about what does it mean when we're talking about my story matters. So listen to this. This is a Henry Nouwen quote. And it says, if you would ask the desert fathers why solitude gives birth to compassion, they would say, because it makes us die to our neighbor. At first, this answer seems quite disturbing to a modern mind. But when we give it a closer look, we can see that in order to be of service to others, we have to die to them. That is, we have to give up measuring our meaning and value with the yardstick of others. To die to our neighbors means to stop judging them, to stop evaluating them, and thus to become free to be compassionate. Compassion can never coexist with judgment. because judgment creates the distance, the distinction that prevents us from really being with the other. And I will now like to hand over to Madi, who's going to take us into the concept of storytelling.
Thank you so much, Janine, and sure, what a nice introduction. Now I see that I know how these Zoom meetings go, so I want us to realize that the next 2 hours is not going to be all of us talking and just entertaining you, because that would be useless. I mean, we're great and we love hearing ourselves talk, but this is an engagement session. And to, while you are processing some of just the emotions and trying to be present here, I'm going to just do a quick, complete switch of rhythm and get some engagement from your side so that you can kind of get used to, you know, raising your hand or engaging from your side. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask a bunch of silly questions, and you just raise your hand if it is relevant to you. It's going to be really silly. But just so that you can get over that first engagement fear. So I'm going to ask anyone to raise their hands if you still have toilet paper that you bought before lockdown. This is not a shaming session. We will not be judging you. Maybe you're just really good prepared. Those of you not sharing video, I want you to participate still in the darkness. You can have a bit more freedom, I guess. Anyone wearing slippers while joining us today? Great. Any of you saving for something? You don't have to say what. It can be for when lockdown ends and you want to splurge on a nice pair of shoes. That's not slippers. Anyone saving for something? Anyone who has already lined up a holiday for after COVID lockdowns? I'm a little bit jealous. I will try not to judge you on that. Anyone that knows someone, unfortunately, that has COVID or has had COVID? And who has learned something about themselves or their partners that they did not know before COVID and is potentially kind of a shock? I've learned stuff about myself. I'm not necessarily a fan of all of that. Okay, great. So we did all of that. We really want you to engage. I'm going to give us a little bit of an introduction to get there. But that was just to kind of make sure everyone is still with us and you haven't started scrolling down on Facebook here on the side. So like I said, I'm from Human Library, and for those that don't know, it's an international movement that facilitates public spaces where people can come and sit down in difficult conversations. So it's literally about giving a platform for people to be able to share their stories. And it can range from various topics. We usually choose one specific area of someone's life where they'll talk about either something they've experienced or a trauma, or just something that's part of their normal narrative, whether it's their religion or political views, their ethnicity. And so a lot of our work is creating a safe space where people feel that their story already carries value because it's their lived experience, but then also for other people to be able to engage in that space and hear someone else's story with a almost a upfront agreement that they might be ignorant about it and that both people will respect the space of this story sharing. And the one thing that we've seen in South Africa, for instance, in the last 3 years, I think the thing that has come up the most when I meet people that wants to get involved, they usually say, but I'm not that interesting, or my story isn't that valuable, or even, you know, okay, I've survived a few things, I've gone through a few things, but you know, there's a lot of people that have gone through that. So how do we value that story, and how do we, if we can't see our own value in that story, how do we actually use that to make a difference? How do we see that it has the potency and the value to actually bring difference? And it could be whether it's in your own life or even on a bigger scale. And I think internationally we have quite a few examples at the moment where a single life story can actually shift organizations or way of thinking or society. So the nice thing about story sharing, which I think is so different these days, is that we are moving away from this idea that there's like this motivational speaker, someone famous, up on there, it's academic even. We've moved to a place where being able to relate to the person telling a story has shown us that it does create a different way for us to feel like that story is obviously relatable, but that, you know, it's not this out there idea. If you sit down with someone, and even if a part of their story is so far from your reach, the nice thing about a story is that it engages around a lot of narrative that might overlap somewhere where you can relate to it, and suddenly it becomes a little bit closer to home. And so I think the thing is, we should never underestimate the value of your own story, obviously, but the value of how storytelling can be used as almost an undercover form of activism. I always say it's like this sneaky little thing that people don't realize. I've seen so many opportunities, even in my own example with family members, where for years we would ruin our family dinners not agreeing about something, and someone would engage with someone that has lived experience. And within 30 minutes, someone would walk away going, oh, you know what, I never thought about it that way. And it's amazing to see what someone's lived experience, that intimate knowing of what they're talking about, and the fact that no one can tell them that it's wrong, what that does to have people engage with the idea in a different way. I think why the platform of storytelling works differently, and why I honestly think it could be a way for us to look at how we change the way we approach certain things in society, is because people choose to listen to stories. It's not a facilitation session that's been dumped on you 10 o'clock in the morning when you're actually on a deadline. It is something you choose to sit down, you choose to listen to a person. You don't expect an end result. And the same for this session. We know when we finish a session, I'm not going to ask you guys if you're signing up for some activist movement somewhere. The idea about storytelling is that you can tell your story without taking something away from someone else. It's yours. And it does create this opportunity where people can find different ways to connect with you. And then the other thing that I think is valuable around storytelling is that it gives us an opportunity to make certain topics more human. I think so many times when we label or create stereotypes or stigmatize certain topics or areas, is that we forget the human element behind it. And when we get back to storytelling and we experience someone's life through that format, it reminds us that there is not just this person representing this one idea, but there's a mom, a daughter, a person that's studying, a person that has been through hardship, a cancer survivor. There's all these layers within a person, and it gives us an opportunity to explore different parts of ourselves, but also different parts of other people. And so I want to maybe just start off to ask anyone if you can think of ways that you feel stories can impact impact lives. I don't know if one of you maybe want to share just randomly how a specific incident by peer storytelling, not like a seminar necessarily, even just people sharing a story with you, have changed your life or have seen how it impacted someone else's life. I don't know if anyone wants to just engage on that. So I will throw out an example there, and I think I want to use that to introduce the next the next thought is, I think when we get to storytelling, there is two ways of thinking, and I want us to maybe then use this as a platform for talking about the way storytelling can impact society or bring a difference. And I think if we think about storytelling, there's two ways. The one is the stories we tell ourselves. You know, I met through one of our volunteers. His topic is being a street surfer, and for those who don't know, he's a reclaimer. So they are informal participants in society that travel through the streets of cities and find recyclable items in the dustbins. So they look into dustbins and then get all these things to go and recycle it to make a living. And when I spoke to Leandro, he told me this part about his story where at the beginning you will see a lot of these people would drive around town with balaclavas over their faces to not be recognized by the members of the community for the work they're doing, because it's quite a dirty job. And then, so his story was very much attached to shame, doing this reclaiming work, until one day someone asked him why he's doing it. And it was, he said, you know, he doesn't have a job, and one of his friends gave him this opportunity. But the main reason he's doing this is to support his daughter to get through school. And someone said, well, why would you hide your face behind a story like that? Why would you tell yourself that there is no value behind it? And so immediately the story told himself, being a person of shame, turned into someone that is extremely proud of the work he's doing. And when that changed, he started working within the community to change the whole idea around it. And they actually mobilized thousands of individual workers on the streets to start doing this work proudly. And they've done incredible work throughout towns. They've gone forward in educational areas where they are teaching people how to do recycling. And in a time where, we all are talking about being green, this person going through the dumpers are literally the person getting his hands dirty. And I wonder how many times the stories we tell ourselves about certain things that we've been through is either holding us back to be able to make a difference. How we think that, we look at some of the topics outside there and we go, this is such a big thing. My story isn't that big to make a difference. But if we retell our stories to ourselves and we just start engaging with people in our immediate vicinity, it can already make a difference. It can already shape how you approach certain things, where you're heading, where you get involved with. And then just the flip side to think about, because I think our stories matter to how we tell ourselves and how we shift between being a victim to being a survivor, or being just a viewer of life as opposed to a participant. But then the other story is that I think sometimes we underestimate the value a single story can have on a bigger scale. And I love to use the example, as an organization, we are an NGO. So when we host events, we were always very kind of just glad to have any space we can use to host an event. All our finances was allocated to get like nice t-shirts for our volunteers, whatever. And then I sat down one day with one of our volunteers, Audrey, who lives with autism. And we spoke about his experiences in a public space and how noises affect him and how he gets overwhelmed in certain areas and how the trip there, if he takes public transport. And suddenly, being an organization that wants to be truly inclusive, and we speak the language of inclusivity, hearing a personal encounter of how elements that we are trying to use to engage with the public is actually being exclusive. His one story actually changed our organizational outlook on how we want to do things. We've started having conversations around, where we host our training events. Is it accessible? Is it accessible for people that can't hear or can't walk properly? And suddenly it changed the financial aspect of our organization. We decided how we are going to step back from marketing stuff until we can actually make sure that we facilitate events that is truly inclusive. And that was a single story of a person that, a lot of people wouldn't consider to employ in a company, a differently thinking person that just spoke about his daily life. And I think maybe this is a good point for us to start saying, COVID has exposed so many vulnerable areas in our life. We've seen how we are interconnected, whether we like it or not. Being in lockdown because of certain environments, because of certain elements of our society, we are connected. You cannot get upset about not being able to open your office if you do not consider the impact it has on people having to travel there and all of those things. So I wonder, as a starting point for story sharing, when we go out into communities or just in our own lives, how we can start using the idea of our own valued story to make a difference, how we can start being a bit more brave and vulnerable just with our own story, without having to think about joining a movement and stuff, just your own story, how sharing that could potentially give advice, change a system, change a lifestyle. And so I want to open the floor to kind of ideas of thinking from your side. I don't know if there's elements or organizations here that is already implementing story sharing in their team dynamics, where you have seen the value of people sharing some of their lived experience and how that has moved something forward. I can obviously mention a gazillion kind of examples, but I really would like to actually get an idea from across the globe how people have seen the value of story sharing as a tool to actually bring about social change. And then we'll go on a few more questions, but I would love to get some engagement from your side. So I don't know if anyone here is in an organization that uses any storytelling platform. Amelia, Janine, I know you guys constantly work.
I see that Sina has a hand up. Maybe she can share, and then Johanna also would like to share her story. So maybe Sina, would you like to share with us your story?
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry I can't put my video on, my camera's malfunctioning. It's wonderful to be with you all. I work with Amelia, I'm from South Africa. We do quite a few ABCD projects. And one story that just came to mind regarding story sharing, in one of our projects, we asked some of our participants to share some stories by creating a sort of piece of art with clay and explaining, what the whole process meant to them through that. And this particular individual, he made a heart, and then he made a sort of pink layer around the heart. And he explained that up until this time, he had been going through extremely, extremely difficult things. People in his family had passed away. He didn't see a way out. It was just really, really a dark time. And the whole ABCD concept just really shed a light on him. It let him know that there are people around him that want to support him. The whole community sort of rallied together. And I think that was really the beginning of a change for him, because this day he's now acquired a big piece of land that he's got all sorts of ideas for and projects that he wants to run on it, and that's up and going. So that was just very inspiring to see how, that was just an example of how somebody just rose up and saw the light and is just doing so well now.
That is amazing.
I want to add to that. This guy was very, very quiet in the session. He didn't share a lot. And then this day when he had to share the clay activity and the black is in the middle and then the pink around it, it was like, oh my word, what's he going to share? It was so motivational. Everybody was crying because it's a life changer. And he's one of our biggest lobbyist in the community. He was also the ANC Youth League guy who actually burnt tires, because that's the way they strike. That's the way they say, listen to us. And then during the session, he was sitting and he said, I must go back to our youth league and we need to change the way we're thinking in South Africa. I'm going to go back. I don't know how I'm going to do this. This is going to be tough. But I'm telling you, we're going to do it differently. And we're rather going to look at what we have than to burn down the area and the things that surround us. And like Sina says, he's now a big change agent. So it's very, very motivational.
Fantastic.
I think one thing that, and we'll move on to the next person that wanted to say something just around this idea. I also see someone said this, to allow the community that built their confidence. I think the beauty of story sharing, that one should also understand why it is such a powerful tool, is I think it gives the right people the opportunity to talk about lived experience. I think a lot of, we are trying to drive a lot of change in communities without letting the people that is truly affected by it give a voice to what the problems are. I think if you lived a specific life and you think your normal is a specific normal, I've seen how giving a platform to those from a different experience can not only make us aware that, we all live different norms and we all have different lived experiences, but also a fresh way of looking at things. I've seen how people that live on the street, one of our volunteers, have changed the narrative about water access in Stellenbosch because he's constantly in need and looking for water, and how they started actually talking about this, where people that have regular access to it, when the water crisis came, they were the ones quiet because they've never been in that experience. So giving confidence for people to realize that this story can actually can be seen and heard, not only as an entertainment value, but potentially without them knowing as a catalyst, I think is incredible. Sorry, who was the other person? I'm trying to find.
Johanna.
Johanna?
Johanna, and then Hanley.
Johanna, you're still on mute.
Hello, I'm Johanna from Cape Town. I want to share my story about my illness and how it touched individuals, families, and friends. I've got an autoimmune condition called sarcoidosis. So when I was working, I was actually 45 years of age at that time, and I struggled with breathing, and I had fatigue, and I was on cortisone. So you can imagine what cortisone does. So I had a moon-shaped face. I was, my figure and everything changed. And so I was, at the time I was teaching at University of Cape Town. Now, I had colleagues at the time who were actually saying, oh, but why is she losing so much weight? And it was the time of HIV/AIDS. So people were actually suspecting that I'm infected with HIV virus. And I said, no, I'm not positive. I'm having sarcoidosis. And this condition does this, you get fatigued, you can lose weight, it can be confused to other illnesses. So after that, then I went to a homeopathic doctor who actually gave me some homeopathic treatment, combining with Western medication. And that actually helped me. I was just about to be boarded. Now, coming to why this story for me was important was that at that time I took pictures of my disfigurement and how, cortisone actually disfigured my whole personality and everything. And then I used those pictures in my lectures to show students how, because I was teaching in the medical faculty, how they can change, use those pictures to change the behavior, lifestyle change, to motivate others to say, you can be disfigured, but if you have a positive attitude, if you understand what the illness is about, and if you can be open about it, you can get resources, people who can help you. And you can be amazed, just after talking about this illness, I got so many phone calls from friends, from family members, so-and-so is having this condition. Then I would speak to them and motivate them and encourage them to say, this is not a disability. You can change your life and you can work through this. I remember one of my daughters saying, Mama, why don't you agree to have a disability parking bay? I said, no, if I can agree to have a disabled parking disc, then I'm actually disabling myself. I'm not going to do that. So I totally refused. So those were the stories, responses and issues which I encountered as I told my story from this illness. And it encouraged people to see you cannot accept that you are disabled. You can do something to, deal with any situation that affects your life. I don't want to go long. It was just really a brief synopsis of what my story is about. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. I think it's so brave. And I think the thing that people sometimes forget, even though this was within a specific topic, the first thing I thought about was you talking about these photos and like how it would change, women's ideas around our body image. That kind of courage to be able to show something like that can on so many levels start conversations around what is our idea of body image, and then the health aspect. I would love to also know where you were working, if they were at all actually considerate towards your health situation. Were they embracing you to be allowed to work more flexible, or was it very strict? Was there any part of your story that changed some of that structure?
Yes, in fact, what I did I used to laugh about it because my size, I was now wearing 44, 46 because of cortisone. You know, you expand. And then from there, after getting, support from the gym and from all other friends, then I started to exercise. I started to eat well, look at what I'm eating, how I am eating. And then that actually helped. But I'm telling you, when I sort of changed my figure, my body, I was not even happy about myself. I was not happy about the way I looked. And the bigger I got, I actually became worried. So body image for me was very, very important. Hence, I started to exercise and to change my lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person.
So the next person is Hanli Buba.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hanli. I live in Stekelaville in the Karoo in South Africa. And I work for an organization called Avocado Vision. And I want to tell you 2 short stories about how storytelling is used in our organization. Firstly, we're a social impact development company. So what we do is we use peer educators in communities to bring essential life skills to people in communities. So we've got about 50 trainer partners in all 9 provinces of the country, and we do enterprise entrepreneurship training, financial literacy training. And the way we do it, because literacy is such a challenge and we've got 9 official languages, it doesn't really work to have 9 different training manuals and fly people all around the country. So we use people in communities who can tell the story of why you need to be financial literate. And we use people's stories in the training to train people about best practice. And one of the best impact stories was people were telling the story of 2 debtors, and the one debtor was hiding away and not talking to the creditors and pretending that the debt didn't exist and not answering their phone when the creditors were phoning. And the other one said, you know what, I've lost my job. I need to actually talk to the bank. I need to talk to my creditors. I need to make a plan, arrangements for payments. And so the story changed for these 2 people, and their lives diverged completely. The one was blacklisted, couldn't find a job, couldn't get a loan, and the other one managed to climb out of the hole of debt. And so this group of people deep in rural KwaZulu-Natal agreed together that most of them were way too indebted. They had credit agreements that they were paying way too much interest on, and they started what they called in South Africa a stokvel. It's a community group where people all contribute on a monthly basis. It's either a fixed amount or it's an amount that is agreed amongst the group, and then every person gets a turn to get the whole amount. And they are then, and the idea was then that they would pay off their entire debt with the money that was collected in the group. And after that, they will keep each other honest, and they will not again start paying so many, buying furniture on credit and buying things on credit that they couldn't afford. So that's a very powerful way in which we use stories in our education. Just in terms of our own company, we every single morning during the COVID times, we have a meeting. We have a check-in meeting where we literally just tell the story of how we are and how our families are and what new recipes we've discovered and what's the hardest thing that we're struggling with. And if you could sit next to anyone that you miss right now, who would it be and why? And those stories have been incredibly connecting. I'd say that our team is way more connected and productive and motivated than probably before at any point. And we've been going since 1996. So yeah, storytelling is very powerful.
That is incredible. And I think that would be interesting if we can change the narrative around storytelling, that it's not this nice thing, but it actually makes, if you want to, you know, people are humans. We work on having a benefit at the end of the day, or reward systems. And if we can change the idea that storytelling actually makes financial sense, you know, if you understand, we had a volunteer that has lupus, also autoimmune disease. And if the company engaged with her and understood her circumstances, they actually gave her some flexibility in how they worked, so they didn't need to retrain a new person to employ. But it needed that engagement. It needed the story behind her. So I think that is so amazing to hear how these things are implemented, yeah, in a space like that.
Mbuzo has got a hand up. Mbuzo, would you like to speak? Mr. Farr. Are you having sound issues? Anyone else in the meantime while he gets his sound sorted out?
Okay. So I think, you know, a lot of the stories we are talking about here is how people kind of adjust their story and become more resilient and approach solutions by relooking their own story. But I would find it interesting to think how we can engage in a certain way, that we can start maybe shift the organization. Because I think one thing, again, with COVID that exposed it was that a lot of our organizational structures are failing us. The way we approach business, you know, before COVID, a lot of people that live with some form of impairment were told, sorry, we can't employ you. We don't do long distance work. We can't let you work from home. And suddenly something like COVID exposes us and it goes, oh, well, this is actually, it makes sense now and we can restructure our company. But I wonder if there's ways, and I don't know if anyone has experienced that, where an individual's impacts a whole organization in restructuring their ideas, or if you see the potential of it, if you see how a unique story or story sharing around just a daily life. I think about so many mothers that, you know, have had to kind of balance out certain elements in their lives, being a mom and being able now in COVID to have a bit more maybe time at home. And if that conversation would actually be able to go back into an office and say, listen, should we maybe talk about how we restructure a company when we consider that? Sorry, I see Johanna, you said you want to share something?
No, there's Johanna and Hannah. I don't know whether Hannah is here.
Oh, okay.
I think, I know we said we shouldn't mobilize the conversation, but I think just from adding a little story from a personal level, I've just recently become a grandmother for the first time. And I know that for my daughter, it was such a, a tough experience, because I mean, something like childbirth, normally in all of our societies, granny comes running, cousins, friends, sisters, everybody comes and shares in the joy of that birth and helps with bringing a meal, or, you know, helping the person to take the baby while she goes off and has a sleep, or even just a shower. You know, my daughter used to say to me at the end of a day, she's like, Mum, I had a good day, I managed to shower today. And it was, you know, it's little things like that we forget. Something like COVID comes along. She didn't have, her husband was an essential services worker because he's a farmer. So he was out of the house at 5:30 in the morning, coming home at 7 at night. He was in and out for meals, but then he didn't want to touch the baby because he'd been out at work, and so he felt, you know, then I have to sanitize and shower and all of that. So she really, those early weeks were very tough at a time when you're supposed to be connecting and sharing your story and sharing your baby, and, you know, being able to have that moment of connection. And she didn't have any of that. And we finally, because of lockdown, managed to meet the little one when he was already 10 weeks old. And I think, you know, it's things like that that we sort of take for granted, but then something like COVID comes along and you realize that those stories are cut short, and we have to find other ways. Luckily, we have WhatsApp videos and so on, so we were able to stay connected. But for many other mothers, you know, there's this whole group of now COVID babies, and they all the girls keep in touch on WhatsApp and try to at least stay connected somehow, because they're all going through that. I think that's something to not, you know, take too lightly.
And I think that's the thing about that sharing opportunity. We see that, so with what we see, what helps with the human sharing format that we use, where people upfront kind of agrees to a certain space. They realize that the conversation might be difficult to talk about, but there's an upfront permission given that you are entering this specific space about storytelling. And we always thought that people are going to be joining the story sharing because they don't agree with the topic, but so many people engage with storytelling because they just want to find someone else that has that lived experience. They just want to connect and go, this is not just me, it's not just my experience, or yeah, someone else got through it. They just, and I saw someone else also mentioning, you know, the power of giving people hope. We've had some incredible stories where people would walk out with their own traumatic stories, and they would listen to one of our volunteers and they would go, you know, if I listen to that, that is such a hard thing to overcome. My problem looks almost, and we always tell people to never minimize their own story and what they go through, but story sharing has this potential to actually just give hope, even if you don't know it. And I think also we should never underestimate that who we're telling that to. A lot of people think the one-on-one story sharing, and story sharing is, you know, it's how's one story or one conversation going to make a difference? But I use this example where one of our events, there was this guy that spoke to one of our volunteers about domestic violence and just gender-based violence and the idea of how women are talked about in general. And this guy walked out and he said, you know, he's been an advocate for equal rights, and he's an absolute, he works with schools. And he realized just through conversation about something that this lady put down, the language he uses is still negative. It still has some form of weight that he never noticed it. But this conversation shifted him. And that was a 30-minute conversation. This guy has been taking part in seminars and training sessions, and a 30-minute conversation with someone that is authentically sharing a lived experience shifted him. And now, considering that this person works in education and the impact he has on so many teachers and students, you know, the potential a story like that actually has when someone leaves is, it shouldn't be underestimated. And I think that's maybe something with story sharing that we also need to relook as a society, is this idea that quantity, you know, we want to change the whole world really quickly. And we see how sometimes it peaks. We get this momentum with a story, but nothing shifts. And the reason is we don't get people's buy-in. And you do get that with story sharing. You know, if you sit with someone and you hear that story and you connect on a deeper level, people shift more easily when they've had that experience. And we shouldn't underestimate that, you know, we've tried everything else. Maybe story sharing is potentially a way to challenge some of these more difficult topics that obviously we haven't been able to cover with a lot of other tools so far. Just want to check if we've got, yes, Heather.
Just going back to the COVID and stories, I've been fortunate enough to keep my job, and we work from home. And so I was trying, and all the kids are home, and we're doing homeschooling. And so I was trying to be a full-time employee, and be a teacher, and trying to get 3 kids to do their schoolwork every single day. And I was losing my mind. And I thought, I'm the only one. And I kept doing it, and I kept doing it. And then I just wrote a message saying, I'm so done. And then the stories came in about others going through it, and other ideas on how to get through it, and little tips and ideas. And you know, that the one story changed my life from that moment on how to cope and understand, and that, you know what, I'm not the only one who is losing her mind. And I was living with this guilt for the longest time. And then that guilt just went away like that. It was so inspiring.
And I think that's the thing, is a story that people don't realize, that just sharing your vulnerability in itself has that power. It isn't, you don't have to change someone's opinion about something. It could potentially just being, you know, I'm vulnerable. And I've been long saying, you know, I honestly believe vulnerability is the new form of activism as well. It's when we are showing people that we are human and we're dealing with the same things, that we actually first connect. And so I think a big part of that, and you mentioned, you know, you kind of feel shamed, that, and a lot of stories I think work around the idea of shame, is that we think some of our experiences we don't want to share because we're afraid of what people will think. I see someone did ask, you know, where people are sharing their stories, if they are more comfortable one-on-one or in smaller groups. And I actually want to connect that to your story, Heather. It's like, if you were standing in a big hall and people were talking about motherhood, there was a very, very small chance you would have raised your hand and said, sorry, I just want to know, does anyone else feel like you're drowning at the moment? Because obviously we feel ashamed of our insecurities, but not just that. I think even if you engage in a conversation and you know your ideas might come as a shock to someone, that you still think in a certain way or approach certain things in a certain way, we are very scared to engage in conversations because of not just the judgment for the person that is maybe going through the stereotype or something, but also for the judgment for the questions we have about it. We somehow feel like we should know everything. And the nice thing about story sharing is that it allows us to create context for that question, where you can explain why you ask something. It gives you that moment to actually be vulnerable in a safe environment where there's not a crowd of 7 people going, oh, I cannot believe you just asked that. You know, you can explain in this time. And it's almost like this exchange of trust that happens in story sharing. You know, I put something a little bit forward, and then I feel a little bit more courageous to ask something. And we've seen that in story sharing platforms, if anyone would ever consider wanting to see how this could be rolled out, because we've had conversations around some of the most taboo topics. I mean, we have ex-gangsters talking about their life stories, and people that have been on both sides of the topic. And it's amazing to see when people choose to go into that conversation and they're allowed to be naive and they're allowed to be vulnerable, how people are willing to actually sit through the most daunting conversations and come out on the other side going, oh, wow, I never thought of it like that. And I wonder how we maybe teach ourselves, but also teach the next generation that story sharing in this way, being vulnerable in this way, could potentially be this massive way of bringing in change. But we've somehow unlearned to, I mean, we have a history of narrative, and we know the power of narrative, and why we're not using it more regularly, I think, in society, we should maybe question that.
And I think that links perfectly with what Hannah's just asked, that how do we legitimize stories to funders or academic institutions? Because although stories have huge value, it's not always recognized at different levels of power. So she's asking, how do we engage with funders or institutions that are not familiar with the value of story sharing? And I think maybe part of the answer is just do it, you know, like get in there and start storytelling circles, start to, you know, storytelling experiences so that they can see it and they can start understanding the value of it. Yeah. We have a few more hands up. There's Conrad and Lisa.
Yeah. Okay, that's Conrad. Yeah, that's me. I was sitting yesterday in the right on the other side of the world, the stories of brand, weaving stories. And during the conversation, what I've realized something about myself, and I think I'm coining a term here. So, Mari, so you can use it. I think I'm a story magnet. I always find myself, people, and without me doing or saying anything, they share their stories. You know, even strangers that you just bump into and, you know, you close just for a long period, and then something starts a conversation and then they end up sharing their stories. I've had that experience most of my life, and sometimes it even scared me. So, and then of course, I don't know if I don't think I'm a good storyteller, but I've learned how to use a story sometimes to extract stories. And Pulu will know the story of the stone soup story. So you can imagine you're just starting government. You want to motivate them to look at them, take into consideration ABCD, positive approaches and all that stuff. And where the heck do you start? How do you tell a story? So I use the stone soup story, you know, and that had quite a good mobilizing effect on colleagues. And then, how do you convince others, especially your bosses in the bureaucracy and even funders, about the value of stories? I think you must just persevere. You will be criticized. In fact, I just got a critique today about me just telling stories, but I take it in a positive light. So I thought I'll share my story. Story magnet.
I love that. Yeah, no, that is a beautiful one, and there's a beauty, and I think it would be interesting to consider what it is about you that makes people feel like they can share their stories. I think people want to be heard. I've seen in some of our volunteer spaces where we've had extremely shy people that couldn't share their life stories, and it's been horrific stories, and people in their team they'd be motivational speakers and stuff, but because they're not a public speaker and they're shy, one-on-one story sharing actually gave them a platform to make a difference and actually relook their lives now and go, I've shifted something, you know. I think story sharing, instead of having maybe a presentation talk, a story sharing allows so many more people to be able to make a difference. And I mean, if that's a numbers game, if we have more people feeling safe to share a story, we have more people changing the world. Sorry, the other person, Janine, you've got
Lisa.
Lisa.
Hi, yes. So I'm just keenly listening, and this is so interesting, and it's so nice sometimes. To me, this is one of those sessions that I used to have like a lot in uni, where you go somewhere and you know that in principle the topic will interest you, but then you go in there and you're like, yeah. And so I studied many different things, but I study sociology also a lot. And like what I always notice is that sociology is so powerful, because you go in there and you start learning how to frame things that you experience every day. So it's just really nice to listen to you all and to just like hear the things that I'm thinking about the topic, and just like getting new inspiration and everything. Because sometimes we do things without necessarily being very conceptually clear about them, right? And what I was just thinking about is like in my context, there are like a few things that I was thinking about, but in my context, I noticed sometimes that like in my professional, but also my personal surrounding, I'm often considered as the person who's somehow strong, the person who's courageous. So sometimes like that also puts me under pressure, and I'm sure that we all share that, because sometimes that puts you under pressure, right? Because like you feel that there's a pressure that you have to be the one who's addressing things and who's like stepping up in certain situations, both towards the outside, but also in the inside. Somehow there's like a location of complicated topics with you somehow. At least that's what I experience. And I think I hear that from people with similar characteristics. And I believe that we might be those people. And so sometimes I find this difficult because, yeah, like I'm personally actually also fairly introverted. So I find it complicated to speak a lot about myself. And I don't like speaking when I feel like it has not been prompted. And I think that helps me. I think that helps me also then like using or opening up. I have a tendency, perhaps a bit like Conrad, of also like attracting stories. And I think it's because I listen a lot, because I ask many questions, and I'm very specific because I find people interesting. And I think that like like really what people experience matters, and it's like the details that make why something like turns out that way. And I find it interesting also to then hear how people understand how things came about, right? So I have a tendency of like asking and just like listening, and I think that makes people like listen to me a lot. But I actually like share very little about my life very often. But I started noticing how I do that very strategically when I feel like perhaps like I have a possibility of influencing someone's courage and influencing someone's sense of self-worth, because I believe that those things are so fundamental for us to being people and for us to being able to achieving anything in life. And I noticed that specifically also in a context, and I think that no one from my team is on this call, but in like professional contexts with my team, where I'm like on top of the hierarchy, if you will, with my specific team, I notice how sharing stories gives them a permission to be. Right? It gives, because I make myself vulnerable, just what you said, because if you make yourself vulnerable, you allow another person to be vulnerable as well. And I really notice that with my team a lot, and in the current context, like also in general, but really also in the current context. So for example, out of our team of 4, who do the ABCD work within ICRAF, 3 of us actually have children, 2 of us have young children. And then as for many other people as well, like we all remained in employment, we're all working from home, but we are supposed to be working, but we have small children. So the fact that I will share with my team that I'm struggling to focus because my child is around and I feel like I'm not doing her justice, then I notice how like my colleagues are opening up and they're like, me too. And I start noticing how they feel that I understand they can't be working all the time and I don't have to say it. And it helps to convey messages without, I don't know how to say that, but without sounding charitable or something. Because when you say, hey, I am human, I need to have space for my humanity, and here, please, like, take space for your humanity as well. And I think that is something that I find really nice. And at the same time, it also makes you more accessible. Because especially when you're somehow like at like a higher point in a hierarchy, it makes you more accessible when you just tell a story, because I don't know, it humanizes you more, I think. And I think that just really helps to recognize each other's humanity, because then all of a sudden, all these other things, they are somehow perhaps not as important as each other's recognition of the mutual humanity. And I find that nice. And for me, that is like one of the things that is similar to using like an overall ABCD approach. Like when I speak in my organization, very hierarchical organization, I usually try and tell them that doing ABCD is not only morally right, it's also just more efficient. And I feel that storytelling is the same thing. Like sometimes people think, we want to do these things because, it's nice and it's almost like hippie. Like, it's like, no, like this stuff works. So yeah. So sorry, after my very long sharing here, I just wanted to say one thing about the like use of storytelling. Sometimes I wonder about one thing, because I'm sure that we have all experienced that as well. When you have someone who's like in some kind of hierarchy above you, but they're oversharing and putting you under pressure with like oversharing very personal things. And then like at the same time also like by sharing, putting somehow pressure on other people to having to share too. So I'm like interested in how people navigate this space of how they interact with someone who might be oversharing, and thereby somehow, I don't know, increasing our vulnerability. And like I will again like specifically say that in specific contexts, sometimes I notice that when people, I live in Kenya, right? And I've lived in Kenya for a long time. And sometimes there's this thing when people come from away, that they come here and so what is your experience with gender-based violence? It's like, dude, no, like, this is not how you will unlock a story. This is not, you know what I mean, right? I'm just like wondering if people have thoughts about that, about how to use it in a delicate way that gives people permission to speak, but does not put them under pressure, and where you also don't burden someone by oversharing. Thank you.
Does anyone want to, from their point of view, weigh in on that? Just from my side, in terms of how we approach it, and we've seen that it works, is when we create these spaces for these conversations to happen, we choose one topic for a person. So they have to kind of label themselves on the one thing that they would like people to change their opinion about. So we use actually the worst stereotypical terms. Someone would sit down and say, I'm an ex-addict, I'm a gay Christian, or whatever. And then we allocate a very specific place for that event to take place. And what that has done is it kind of it kind of frames this safety where people know when they're going in what part of their life they're going to share. So they've got a little bit more, they can frame their story within that while still bringing in a lot of the other context. And the person joining them in that conversation knows what they're walking into as well. And I think what's valuable about that, and I don't know if many of you know the idea around the backfire effect, where if something's part of your ingrained belief system that you grew up with and stuff, if someone's going to challenge that, instinctively as a human being, you will kind of become defensive, because if someone changes that idea, it might potentially collapse your whole ego, your whole idea system, your whole belief system. So we just wired to kind of defend our ideas. But the nice thing about story sharing is that it diffuses that, because someone's not walking into a conversation to be challenged, they're walking into a conversation to know more. And if you frame that space and you make people aware, and it's like we need to teach people to go into these conversational spaces again, where the person telling their story is already valued. We've already told them that their story is legit, it's their lived experience, and someone else might disagree with the topic or say they would have called it something else, but the person telling the story should be given understanding that they are supported in their story, and that the person that's joining that conversation, or the person, the listener in that story, are allowed to be naive, and that they don't have to exchange anything from their part. They don't have to give up anything to validate the space for the story to happen. I think that's important for people to feel that they know what they're walking into with story sharing, and especially when it's not, and we see that it actually works really well when people don't know each other. It's much easier to ask someone that you've never met, who you potentially might offend, a very personal question, as opposed to asking your sister if you think that there's a relationship that might weigh in the balance. So I think a lot of work needs to be done to create specific spaces for that sharing to happen. Obviously, again, like you also said, Lisa, it is a more efficient approach, I think, in the workplace. And someone else asked, how do we motivate sponsors around story sharing? You show them the value of what story sharing can do. When people feel seen, when people feel valued, you will get the best out of them. You'll find that commitment. So what are people doing? We had an example now where one group that reached out to us said, you know, they are a predominantly white managing group, and most of their junior team members are Black. And during this Black Lives Matter, they just wanted to find this way of reaching out and saying, we understand that this is a complex situation. We want to acknowledge and find out how we do this. And it was an honest question they had, but they had no idea how to approach it. And it's just a human conversation, but they needed to work around, how do we create the space so that we consider where it's coming from? And I think maybe that would be interesting, is if we can teach people the value that in an organizational structure, it even financially makes sense if you engage with your teams. I mean, most companies want to at the moment be very diverse, and they have all these diversity trainings, but do they really know the story behind it? So how much more better can that be facilitated through story sharing if you actually invest in your own people, if you give them a platform to be heard, where it's safe to be heard, where it is your value as an employee or team member isn't connected to everything else that makes you a human being. And it would be interesting to hear from your side, other people that have had experiences of story sharing in the office, where either the fears around it, and how it could be challenged, I guess. I think the big thing with companies, and it's something that is constantly kind of carrying on, recreating a dangerous situation, is that vulnerability can come at a cost. So we always tell people to only share what they're comfortable with, but it would be great to challenge companies and say, well, realistically, I am allowed to say that I have a mental impairment. I am allowed to say that I suffer from a medical situation without risking my job. And we don't have the answers necessarily for all of this, but I think that we do need to change the language around storytelling as just this nice little social thing, but potentially a tool.
So Maddie, if I can share, I think this is about the permission to actually be vulnerable. And Johanna, thank you for sharing your personal story, because it opened some memories in my past. About a year and a half ago, I had to work at a mine, and we had to do our medicals at the mine. And when we finished, we have to go through to the doctor, and then the doctor says, yes, you medical fit, you can go to and work in the mine. So I was sitting there not expecting anything. I'm not pregnant, I am fine, I can work in the mine. And then the doctor called me in and he said, did you know that you are deaf in both ears? And I was sitting there and I was looking at him and I'm thinking, you must be joking, it's not true. And he said to me, okay. I said, can we operate? Is there anything else? He says, no, he's not a specialist, but I need to go and see somebody who can help me. For 2 months, I kept it for myself. I didn't talk to my husband. I didn't tell my children. I didn't do anything. I didn't talk to people at work. I just could not do it. And I think it was because I had to challenge myself because of that preconceived ideas of what do I think is people with a disability, and is it disability? Is it something that I've got certain perceptions about? And is it that if you're deaf that you're stupid? Is it if you're deaf that you cannot do your job? Will my work organization tell me, sorry, you're disabled and you cannot keep on working? So I then went to a doctor in Pretoria, and then the doctor confirmed. I was very brave and I was sitting there, and she said, it's definitely, I must have had it from when I was a little baby. I can do mouth, I can read lips, and I don't even know that I'm doing it. So, and that had a big influence on my life. The first thing was that I had to work through it. I could not speak to my husband. I was crying so much. And then I went to tell my manager in the end, and she said, okay, let's do this and this and that. What I'm actually want to say is that I've got my thingies in both ears, and it doesn't make me a less person or somebody that cannot do my job. I was very scared, and I am still sometimes, I'm thinking even these type of meetings, how can I don't see Pauline, I don't see Leslie. I'm scared that I'm not going to hear what they are saying, and perhaps I'm a little bit of slowpoke, but eventually I get there and I can make jokes about it because I've learned how to do that. But that is that space where you first have to work through it yourself and your own ideas about things, and then share one-on-one. Even that question that was asked earlier, can we do it in a small group? I think it all depends on whether your story is so personal that you don't want to share it with anybody else. And then when you start sharing, it's almost as if you check what other people are thinking. What are they going to say about that? And that feedback, when it's a positive feedback, you start actually doing something about it. And in the end, there's people in our organization that I actually helped because I had to work through it. And the one lady in our office also found out that she's deaf in the one ear. And we've got white noises in the area. In our building, everybody thought this is going so well, and in the end they are putting down the white noises because it's also got an influence on everybody else that's difficult hearing. So that made me very vulnerable. I think I did not, there's lots of you that know me that might not even know that I've got a problem or had a problem. I don't have it anymore. So thank you for sharing. And I think it's really creating that personal space to help other people to work through their own issues and how we react to that.
Thanks for sharing, Amelia. Sure. Mujaji? You're still on mute?
Mute, sorry. Hi.
Oh, sorry, you're back on mute? There we go. No.
Hi,
there we go.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Thank you, Maddie. I would like to share the story related to the work that I do. I work for the Department of Social Development. And in the work that I do, we normally have what we call community conversations, get stories from the communities. And I think the beauty that I realized in doing community conversation, especially in storytelling, is that it brings out the face of the story. You'll be in a community session and talking about community issues in general, but once you have somebody standing up and say, this is what I have experienced in this community, this is my story, you then have other stories coming up where people are now free to talk about their experiences in this community, which now assist you in terms of mobilizing the community. Whereas when you talk about general issues in the community, without that face, without that person telling their individual story, you kind of lose the other stories that people are hiding because they are shy to share their stories. So for me, storytelling at a community level, it helped me in my work, one, in identifying the faces in the issues that are taking place in the community, but also mobilizing the community behind the social ills, especially most of the social ills that are taking place in the communities. Because when you speak about the general issues, for example, when you're talking domestic violence at a general level, it doesn't have that value until somebody says, this is what I'm experiencing. As a person in this community, I've been raped, and this is my experience. Then you have a number of people coming up and say, what do we do as a community? How do we come together and make sure that we work on this? And at a personal level, for me, storytelling has helped me deal with challenges in my personal life, especially at the workplace. I'll feel overwhelmed. I'll feel I have personal challenges at home that at some point I feel like they affecting my work. And I'll go to colleagues and say, colleagues, can you please help? This is what I am going through. Only to find that somebody else have gone through the same experience, and sharing that they then share how they dealt with the issues, which in a sense helps me how to deal with my situation. Thanks for listening.
Sure. That is incredible, and that is exactly the thing. I think if we can have that type of format in our communities, and then make that kind of way of sharing a more approachable thing, if it becomes a way of growing up I grew up in a typical family where we don't talk about difficult topics, we don't talk about those stereotypes, and if we can start teaching our communities that storytelling is a powerful tool, that it is a valid tool, that something that has happened to you isn't who you are, it's just something that happened to you, and by sharing that, you empower yourself again, you know. I think that the thing about storytelling is that you own the topic that is so easily given to you when you start talking about it. We've heard a lot of volunteers that speak about storytelling that after a year, so they almost don't relate to some of the topics they started off talking about, because it feels like they've moved past it, because they've owned it. By telling that story, they decide how to share it, they decide what they can change with it, and they use that to make a difference. And I think if we can teach people that vulnerability is momentarily quite a courageous thing to do, and it's scary, but you will be amazed that more people are actually, I think, to give the opportunity for people to prove you wrong, that you're not as judged as you think you are, you're not as alone as you think you are, but the only way that's going to happen is through story sharing. And it can start small. It can start with taking a brave step and sharing with a family member or a friend, or going to a platform where having conversations is between strangers. We see a lot of volunteers that is very comfortable sharing with complete strangers quite intimate details that has happened to them, and people being willing to ask difficult questions because they feel it's potentially safe. And then they go home and then they start having those conversations at home. So imagine we can have more opportunities where communities can come together and feel safe, that they won't be rejected for whatever they're going to share, but it can be seen as a way to mobilize change and change the way we approach things. And like you say, give a face to some of these topics. We see that in companies. We once hosted an event with quite a large company in Washington. And so a big part of story sharing also is that it has to happen with parts that you're comfortable with, and parts that you feel safe opening up with, and parts that you're in a healthy place with. And it was amazing to see what companies in quite a high profile company would start sharing. In a company, what is very important is that everyone takes part in it. And a lot of the people that sat in sessions where conversations were had around difficult topics came back afterwards and said just the fact that leadership showed up and took part in conversations and were part of the people sharing their stories changed the dynamics in the office. They changed how people would now actually open up about struggles, not necessarily even personal struggles, but be honest about, listen, I'm having trouble with this thing we're having in the office. This is creating obstacles. This is a blocker for us as a productivity element, because they remembered that even their boss, is a human. And sometimes we just maybe need to invite the conversation in, even if we don't participate in it. Just create spaces for people to have that conversation, even as individuals. You might know someone whose story could be so potent and valuable to help someone else that's going through something similar. It doesn't have to be on a big scale. It doesn't have to be courageous and brave and like spilling your guts out. It can just be encouraging someone else with an individual story, someone that you know. And I think that's the beauty is, a lot of people hear famous people talk about something and our excuse are, well, it's easy to talk if you have a massive house and a car and a bank account that can pay for all the stuff happening around it. But if you hear of someone that is sharing how they survived a rape and they're still living in an environment that is extremely cruel towards them financially and socially, and you see that they are actually courageous enough to share their story, well, then it becomes easier for us to go and say, well, maybe I can share a bit of what I've been through, or maybe I can change my ideas around how we share about that. I think a big challenge for us in story sharing is breaking down the stigmas attached to so many topics. I saw someone else also going about, the idea of normal. I think that's our problem, is that even our own stories, we try and frame within this idea of what is normal. And again, that's maybe a question we must ask ourselves, is how do we tell our story, our own personal story? Because if you're going to try and frame it within this idea of a normal, you won't be able to change a system. You won't be able to change ideas, because that's the problem. The idea of normal is part of the problem, I think. Just want to look through some of these comments. Janine, I don't know if there was someone with a hand up.
I don't think there's any hands up anymore, and we've actually been asked if we wouldn't mind to close the session in the next 5-10 minutes, because apparently the same link is being used for the next one, and the hosts have to get in and set themselves up and whatever. So Michelle has asked if we can just cut ourselves short a little bit. So
Okay,
perhaps we need to just make sure we do the photograph and then just do like a very, very short final comment or final question.
Yeah, well, maybe just from my side, if anyone is interested, we will be sharing stuff afterwards. If you're interested in how to create little safe pockets of conversational spaces, how we encourage people to start opening up and where's a good starting point. I think the thing about why your story matters, and we specifically spoke about my story, that individual story, is that we don't underestimate the value of having a one-on-one conversation. We don't underestimate the normalcy of our own life stories, and that could potentially mean the world to someone else. And that in its own can really shift behavior, and it can move systems, and it can change organizations. And I think we honestly can start reshaping the narrative around storytelling, if I can put it like that. And maybe to ask yourself, just where can you see yourself using storytelling in your own lives right now? Individually, in a relationship, maybe being a bit more brave and vulnerable, exploring topics that previously you were too scared to engage with, maybe asking someone that you've known for a long time a question that you've never thought about, a part of their life story. Just give them a platform to share their story and find potentially something kind of potent in there. And also maybe, yeah, I think we shouldn't stop dreaming about what the value of that story can then do on a bigger scale. I actually want to encourage people to feel a bit more brave about seeing those things that make you. Your story specifically, your life experience could potentially be a different way of thinking for someone else. And maybe see how some things that you have experienced can potentially make a difference in someone else's life.
I've just seen a question here from Liam. He wanted to know the background to the Johnny Clegg video. And I think for me, it's just that idea of the danger of a single story. Johnny Clegg, especially in the 80s, he was a musician. He was fluent in isiZulu. His musical partner was Sipho Mchunu. And it was very unusual in those days to have a white person who so completely adopted the culture of Zulu people and was able to sing fluently. The songs that he wrote were in Zulu and English. And so like he's the kind of person that for us is like one of those people that don't judge a book by its cover, and that's where the whole idea of being non-judgmental when you come across somebody is to not look at them and think that that person is white, so therefore he speaks English or Afrikaans and he has certain political views. Johnny Clegg was one of those people who just messed up all of those stereotypes. So that's why we thought to share. And I mean, he passed away recently, so our South African hearts are still very sore because he was an amazing person he was at the university when I was there in the 80s, and he was an anthropology lecturer, but he used to also sing at the concerts. And it was just beautiful to see him pulling people together of all races during those critical times when we were all fighting apartheid. So he's just one of those icons for us that breaks down that whole idea of a story stereotype.
Janina, I might be wrong also, but I think he also, that was written for, was that the song that he wrote for Nelson Mandela to say, we see you?
Yes.
I think, yeah. And I think that's maybe something to go away, is that storytelling is a way for us to recognize someone's life story, their lived experience, to honestly actually make time to see someone else for not just what we think we know about them, but just to sit down and actually be able to be surprised. I think from my side, I really appreciate that you took some time aside to engage with us around the idea. I hope this has started some just catalyst for you to think about how storytelling could potentially be used in your community, in your work, how it could maybe shift dynamics in an office space, in relationships, and how vulnerability can honestly be a potentially potent thing to use. Then I don't know if the group photo,
Yes, I don't know whether Heather can do that because she's now the host.
I can, it's just a screen capture and there's 2 screens, so
Okay.
I have to do twice.
So if you want to be in the picture and have your photo, have your face, please switch on your videos and we'll do the first set of people first.
Except people won't know who they are.
This is the best part.
Smile the whole time.
Just smile anyway, just smile twice.
You Jasmine, you can do funny photos. Ready? 1,
Thumbs up.
2, 3. This is the first one. I gotta paste that. Okay.
Put me in both. Put me in both. Put me in both.
You are in both. Ready? Second one. 1, 2, 3. Let me just make sure I.
Show us. Thank you, everybody. This was very inspirational and lovely. Enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Madi and Amelia and to Heather for also sitting in and keeping us going. Thank you, everybody, for your stories. And just, be brave. Go out there and be vulnerable, because in vulnerability is the power to grow.
Don't know about that. It's when you come back with scars, okay? You'll be the nurse.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.